Imagine a universe where nothing moves. No light, no sound, just an infinite expanse of dark water. This is the world of the first Titans, a reality where the sky and the earth were fused so tightly that life literally had no room to breathe. We are told the world was built by the gods, but the Sumerian records tell a darker truth. According to those ancient clay texts, the world was not built, it was seized. Before the first city was ever planned, there was only the Ilanu Kamutu, the primordial titans who ruled a universe of absolute, crushing stillness. As we drift into this journey of unimaginable ages past, we are tracing the complete arc of these great rebellions, from the first spark of noise that disturbed the ancient deep, through the violent overthrow of the old masters, to the final moment the chaos of the abyss was transformed into the physical reality we now inhabit. This is the full story of how a universe of shadows was reclaimed and reshaped into the world of light that is all we have known for thousands of years since. What if the Anunnaki gods were never the original builders of existence at all, but instead the consequence of a conflict far older than memory itself, constructing everything we know from what had been left behind? How did the Anunnaki gods actually bring the fabric of our reality into being? Think about the real meaning of that for a moment. The gods that ancient civilizations prayed to, built temples for, and organized their entire lives around, may have themselves been standing on the shoulders of something even older and even more powerful. Stay with us as we move through some of the deepest layers of Mesopotamian mythology, searching for fragments of a forgotten cosmos, one which existed long before the first ziggurats ever reached up into the twilight sky. This sweeping story brings to light the hidden history of the ancient Anunnaki Titans, the primeval forces who once held dominion over a universe of motionless and infinitely dark waters. It was a secret which gradually slipped away from human memory, seldom spoken aloud by the generations that followed. Yet it remained a foundational truth that quietly shaped everything those people left behind. You can find its traces carved directly into the walls of their grandest monuments, embedded within the base 60 system of their earliest star charts, and pressed into the cuneiform etchings of their most sacred clay records. What is striking about that is how deliberately it was preserved. These were not casual references. The people who recorded this information went out of their way to make sure it survived, embedding it into the very structures and systems that defined their civilization. Long before the first scribes ever set down the deeds of mortal kings, these primordial gods held complete dominion over the unformed elements of creation. Their dramatic overthrow and ultimate betrayal lie at the very core of the Enuma Elish, a story that reaches all the way back to the earliest dawn of time. Our journey begins inside the ancient Babylonian creation myth, our awareness gently descending into a tranquil and lightless past, where the very first lords still slumbered. This mysterious text introduces us to the seized gods of Mesopotamian lore, a gathering of fallen creators, known in sacred tongues as the Ilanu Kamutu. Ancient priests used this official term to describe a captive and inactive generation of their very first primordial masters. Once the supreme rulers of nature, many of these formidable titans were eventually defeated, stripped of their radiance, and hurled down into the hollow depths of the underworld, while others simply dissolved quietly from memory. There is something quietly haunting about that image. These were not minor figures. They were the original rulers of existence itself, and yet they were cast down, forgotten, and replaced. What remains of them now exists, not as memory, but as the ground beneath our feet. They exist now only as subterranean ghosts, serving as the silent rocky foundations that bear the heavy weight of the conscious world from below. Their eternal patience forms the absolute bedrock of reality, allowing the surface world to rest safely above their dormant forms. To truly understand how this cosmic sovereignty passed from such powerful titans, we have to trace their forgotten origins through the ancient records that still carry their lineage. A well-known cuneiform god list, called An-Anum, follows this obscure ancestry across its weathered clay surface. It records the names of over 20 distinct generations of cosmic parents who existed in the shadows long before the light of the first dawn. Later scribes made it explicitly clear that these dormant figures were the direct ancestors of the more familiar Anunnaki pantheon yet to come. Recording these honored names was a deeply sacred duty, a way of honoring the earliest craftsmen of a vast cosmic structure. Each generation represented a slow settling of universal elements as raw potential began to softly converge in the deep. This unbroken chain of primeval lineage stretched backward into an unfathomable depth of history, where all familiar shapes dissolve into pure energy. A profound sense of stillness filled this initial dawn, completely defying our ordinary understanding of time. It was a tranquil universe, existing entirely without predictable cycles or shifting seasons, lacking any particular patterns to mark the passing years. There were no disruptive thoughts or sudden movements to disturb the absolute stillness that blanketed this boundless aquatic void. An absolute quiet settled across the infinite primordial waters, creating a perfectly still ocean of endless possibility. The unformed cosmos rested in a state of deep harmony, where every element remained locked in a gentle embrace. Without the warmth of a sun or the pull of a moon, those earliest eons drifted peacefully within a completely static void. It is worth pausing here to really let that sink in. This was not emptiness in the way we usually think of it. It was a kind of fullness, a deep and patient waiting, as though the universe itself knew that something extraordinary was about to begin. Among the specific names carved into this ancestral list lies the fascinating story of Duri, alongside his counterpart Dari. Their ancient names translate directly to the eternal and the everlasting, representing time in its most elemental state. They ruled over this peaceful reality, long before younger deities ever established the predictable cycles of slowly wandering stars or shifting atmospheric weather. These ultimate embodiments of time did not advance with a steady rhythm, but instead lingered like a deep reservoir of perfectly motionless liquid. Their reign was defined by an unbroken flow where past eras were completely indistinguishable from the next. It was an age of pure endurance, where the fundamental laws of existence were slowly steeping in the darkness. Alongside them stood the foundational deities known as Alala and Belala, who served as the very first personifications of sound itself. They represented the distant hum of a vibrating universe that echoed softly throughout the black expanse. Their presence was not a spoken language, but rather the raw echoing resonance of the early earth slowly taking shape in the depths. That detail is quietly profound. Before light, before form, before any recognizable shape existed in the cosmos, there was sound, a hum, a resonance, as though the universe was breathing before it was born. This cosmic vibration moved through the ocean like a slow heartbeat pulsing within the chest of a sleeping giant. It offered the very first sensation of movement within the stagnant void, a gentle signal that the universe was beginning to stir. The soothing resonance of their combined voices settled into one perfect tone, forming a baseline for the complex melodies of life that would eventually follow. These original forces of the earliest creation stories would ultimately serve as the absolute foundations for all later Anunnaki gods to inherit, their silent presence providing the vital materials required for forming the very earth itself. By slowly surrendering their active roles, many of these titans would ultimately come to form the hidden structural framework that safely cradles the fragile surface of our reality. Their dormant forms supplied the heavy bedrock upon which the first sprawling cities of humanity would later be raised. This profound sacrifice transformed the swirling chaos of emptiness into a stable anchoring point for the next great phase of creation to unfold. Before we begin our journey tonight, take a deep breath, settle into the stillness. If your eyes are getting heavy, let them close. If the room is dark, let the shadows be a comfort. This space is built for pauses, for the slow unspooling of time, a quiet harbor where the present moment gently dissolves. But before the history takes over, I want to ask you something simple. Feel the quiet, look into the dark, and tell me in the comments below, what city are you in right now, and what hour is it? Whenever I read through your responses, it feels like we are building a quiet, invisible bridge across the globe. There is something profoundly beautiful about the fact that right now, in this exact breath, someone in Tokyo is watching the very first light of morning hit the glass, just as someone in a rainy corner of Ireland is letting go of a long day at midnight, all while someone in a quiet house in Texas is listening to these exact same words, just looking for a little bit of peace. All of us living in completely different moments of our lives, yet sharing in the exact same silence. If you find a sanctuary here in these late-night wanderings through the past, please consider subscribing. It helps our quiet community grow, and it ensures you'll always have a soft place to land whenever it is time to rest. Leave your comment. Tell me your city and your hour, because in a way, that is exactly what history is. It is the story of human beings, standing in their own fleeting moments of time, looking into the darkness and leaving a trail of clues for the rest of us to discover. Tonight, we follow one of those trails. Let the light of the day fade away as we step backward together to explore the mysteries of our past. Before any towering mountains could rise from the dark soil, our vast universe was simply a boundless ocean of absolute darkness. Sumerian mythology speaks of an infinite expanse known to ancient priests as Nammu. She was revered as an original mother of all things, resting quietly as a fertile source of potential life. Ancient scholars did not view this primeval sea as a monster to be feared or conquered. They understood her as a peaceful point of origin before physical matter ever took its final shape. This silent womb provided a nurturing environment for a reality that was still waiting to be born. Later Babylonian traditions would personify this aquatic embodiment as a brilliant blending of two distinct waters. They named the great mother of the salty seas, Tiamat, pairing her alongside a sweet companion of fresh water known as Apsu. These legends describe Tiamat as an endless expanse of heavy ocean currents heaving softly in the dark. Her massive form existed in perfect balance beside the cool abyss of fresh water. Ancient texts suggest that their combined presence filled the empty void with a deeply comforting silence. It was a beautifully dormant era that stretched across countless millenniums of forgotten memory without a single interruption. There is something deeply compelling about that image. Two vast bodies of water, one salt and one fresh, simply existing beside each other in perfect stillness. No conflict, no ambition, just a quiet and patient universe holding its breath before the first great story began. An entire cosmos floated lazily within a serene suspension of water, far removed from any chaotic friction of later eras. A profound sense of tranquility saturated every single drop of this endless sea. There were still no harsh winds to whip the surface into a violent storm. Those waters remained as smooth as polished obsidian glass, reflecting nothing but an absolute emptiness. Floating within this liquid sanctuary, the earliest elements of existence drifted together in complete harmony. Eventually, a slow shift of cosmic proportions began within that dark eternity. Those heavy oceans of salt started to mingle with the fresh springs of the underground, stirring a gentle churning which created the very first tangible material in a completely lightless reality. Their subtle movements caused tiny particles to slowly drift together across vast distances. A rhythmic pulling of ancient tides gathered loose elements into soft clusters of mud. Solid matter was finally beginning to coalesce within the peaceful embrace of the earliest oceans. The heavy scent of wet minerals began to permeate our unformed universe. Swirling currents guided this newborn soil into gentle patterns. Slowly, a firm foundation was being woven together from the absolute emptiness of that ancient abyss. According to the legendary Enuma Elish, this mixing of distinct waters gave birth to early entities of soil. Ancient scribes called these original offsprings by the names of Lahmu and his sister Lahamu. They represented the very first sediment settling out of those primordial waters, slowly separating to form our world directly from its churning body. Esoteric tablets of clay describe these two figures as massive giants floating quietly through the deep, the very physical manifestations of heavy silt drifting lazily in an insulated environment. Their colossal forms provided a necessary anchor for the elements of life gathering around them. Think about what that means for a moment. The very first beings to emerge from creation were not gods of thunder or fire. They were beings of mud and silt, patient and grounding, whose entire purpose was simply to hold things together. There is a quiet wisdom in that, one which the ancient world seemed to understand far better than we do. These silent guardians asked for nothing but to rest eternally in this dark embrace. They lacked any restless ambition to conquer or organize a sprawling cosmos. Their singular purpose was simply to exist as a grounding weight for the floating debris of early creation. Over unfathomable stretches of time, this floating sediment naturally began to accumulate. Countless layers of soft mud packed tightly together under a heavy pressure of water. This dense material slowly hardened to form the initial crust of our early planet. Those drifting giants essentially morphed into the massive shelves which form our continents. Future life would eventually find a safe place of rest upon their broad shoulders. It was a completely organic process of slow evolution within the ether. It is natural to appreciate the unhurried state which prevailed during this new dawn of creation. The early Earth remained a quiet expanse of mud, resting peacefully inside a cosmic ocean, creating a serene environment that was totally undisturbed. Every passing era laid another thick layer of heavy soil upon the expanding floors of the sea. The gentle lapping of primordial waves smoothed the rough edges of these new continents. A beautifully structured planet was slowly coming to life beneath cool waves. Nature was allowed to mature at its own deeply meditative pace, taking millions of years to compact into solid rock and stone. A slow accumulation that guaranteed a stable underlying foundation for the towering empires yet to arrive. No harsh sunlight penetrated those calming depths to dry the wet silt. A profound sensation of absolute security wrapped around these hardening geological formations. All the while, those sleeping giants of silt simply floated in a state of suspended animation. What is quietly remarkable about all of this is that the ancient Sumerians were essentially describing geology, long before modern science had any language for it. These stories were encoding a real understanding of how the earth beneath us actually formed, layer by patient layer. Their inherently passive nature allowed them to quietly fade into the background. It was a peaceful retreat that transformed their enormous bodies into the literal bedrock of the earth beneath our feet, and the embankments supporting sweet channels of fresh water which have nourished our planet all these many years. As soft clay slowly solidified into vast plains of unbroken ground, every passing epoch added another layer of heavy sediments. A silent architecture was building itself without any urgent need for immediate completion. Those silent giants would come to fade permanently into the dark soil, to act as the unseen cornerstone of all material reality. Their quiet resignation meant that the future world would never be torn by their chaotic movements. A profound sense of enduring stability was forever woven into that basic fabric of our early Earth. By settling into an inactive slumber, they provided the essential support for an ever-changing cosmos. Those vast plains of mud were now entirely prepared to support a magnificent burst of terrestrial growth. The silent landscape rested patiently, while subtle pressures continued to build deeply within its heavy layers of packed earth. An immense shift was finally ready to push the first towering structures of the cosmos upward into existence. A heaviness began to stir across this crust of recent formation. Sumerian mythology tells of a massive mountain rising slowly from those boundless depths. This breathtaking formation of stone broke through the glassy surface with extreme caution, bringing the physical presence of solid mass to the aquatic horizon. Here it is said that the primordial Mother Self procreated to bring forth a sky god of immense beauty named An, her actions echoing throughout time. This towering Father of Heaven emerged perfectly paired with an earth goddess of heavy density, known as Ki. Both of these monumental forces were brought into reality, completely fused together in this tremendous mound, which rose from the ocean floors. This magnificent union was referred to collectively as Anki, the Great Cosmic Mountain. It stood as a solitary mountain of immense scale, stretching from the deepest river valleys up to the highest reaches of the atmosphere all at once. An was securely locked together with Ki in a permanent embrace. This static posture held them tightly against one another and left absolutely no space in which to move. It created a suffocating weight that pressed heavily down upon those layers of fertile silt. Life could not physically bloom within such a space of incredible tightness. There was absolutely no breathable gap between the heavy mass below and the stars of distant galaxies above. The sky remained entirely indistinguishable from its terrestrial counterpart. They pressed together in a constant building intensity that demanded release, a timeless union that prevented any sort of natural growth from taking root. Unable to take a single breath, everything remained frozen within this monolith of heavy stone, awaiting liberation. It is a rather striking concept. Here were two of the most powerful forces in all of creation, and yet it was their very closeness that caused such confliction. Not the kind of conflict that stalled the universe, but an embrace so total that at first nothing else could exist within it. While tensions slowly mounted, these ancient pairs observed the shifting reality around them with grace. They recognized the growing obsolescence of passivity as the cosmic structure of a new design began to clearly establish dominance. Unlike the violent titans of other domains who would eventually rebel against the later courts of supreme authority, these early entities chose a different path. They would not fight against younger gods for control of a developing universe. Much like those ancient silt giants who slowly settled to form the Earth's crust, they voluntarily stepped out of sight, retreating to the farthest reaches of the heavens, or deep beneath the ground below. These ancestors of forgotten lore would become respectfully known as the Slumbering Lords, surrendering as they entered eternal rest. They chose to retreat quietly into the shadows, their peaceful journey honoring the intricate and intelligent geometry of unfolding time and space. But long before they would fade into the recesses of memory, the pressure between the sky and earth was growing increasingly unbearable by each passing eon, under the strain of the cosmic mountain. The unbridled energies which now hummed throughout the universe possessed a new desire of deep longing to finally expand outward. The Earth Goddess herself possessed seeds of countless varieties that simply could not sprout without the atmosphere of open skies. Her boundless fertility was tightly caged within a solid tomb of compressed minerals. Unborn forces within longed to express the vitality of green hues she held so protectively, and carry those vibrant colors across plains of endless reach. Yet this paradise of potential growth was still entirely suffocated by the incredible mass pressing down from the sky above. Imagine the suspense. An entire world of color, of life and growth, locked inside a body of stone, waiting for a single breath of open air. Such tensions were rapidly reaching a breaking point of critical severity. Every molecule of existence vibrated, eager for release. A staggering separation was about to tear this world of ancient origins wide open. For that seemingly endless embrace connecting An to Ki could not last forever. Much like the ever-shifting currents of the silent seas, the absolute stillness of this ancient time was destined to give way to the rhythms of change. To contemplate this forgotten law is to get a small glimpse of the magnificent birth pangs of our living world, as interpreted by the earliest stargazers. They left behind a beautiful meditation on the transition from stagnant potential into a living, breathing reality. The ancients weren't just telling a story. They were mapping out the profound realization that before the architecture of the earth could flourish, the universe had to endure a sacred separation. To unleash the vibrance of life within, this mesmerizing narrative places us at the very precipice of a new era, where existence itself holds its breath. Every hidden layer of the compressed stone seemed to swell with heavy expectation, waiting for a catalyst to redefine the dawn. A profound transformation was taking shape in the quiet, concentrating all its ancient weight into a single moment which forever changed the fate of the world. Powerful forces of an invisible presence began to gather deeply within a space of narrow margins. A quiet murmuring reverberated through those solid walls to signal an awakening of great magnitude. It was the sound of faint echoes hinting at an impending change. The cosmic mountain of Anki began to tremble under its own suffocating gravity, causing thick fractures to spread slowly across its rigid, towering form, deepening rapidly. The smallest of these first cracks offered a glimpse of freedom from the crushing weight. The universe was preparing to permanently alter its own essence. Such a transformation of magnificent scale would require a burst of incredible force, carrying the power of raw energy itself. It would demand a presence strong enough to pry apart those titans of early creation. A bright new entity waited patiently to breathe life into the desolate and barren soil, knowing Ki held the potential of vast fertility closely within her core. Even the primeval waters of Nammu seemed to sense the coming rupture, shifting in anticipation. She watched as her children struggled against their own bonds. Even one of the oldest forces in all of creation, the primordial ocean herself, recognized that something had to give. There are moments in these ancient stories where you can feel the entire universe leaning forward, as though existence itself was holding its breath. And perhaps it was. These final moments held a precarious silence, one which hung heavily over the ancient landscape. It was a quiet of deafening intensity that preceded a roar of unimaginable volume, signaling a new beginning which would give way to the world we now know. Every grain of densely compacted silt braced itself for an impact of monumental force, sensing a new shape slowly forming deep within its core. This spark carried a dynamic power of ferocious strength, born of the raw forces of an untamed wilderness waiting to be unleashed. This rift of atmospheric friction was slowly gathering strength inside its prison of breathless voids, preparing to erupt. A profound awakening was finally set into motion. The suffocating pressure holding the sky to earth had reached the furthest limit of its endurance. Something entirely new was quietly taking shape in that incredibly narrow margin between them. The timeless union of these two massive entities would produce one of the most exalted and oldest figures of the more well-known hierarchy of Anunnaki gods, who would later come to rule the earth. After all, the term Anunnaki literally translates to offspring of An, or those of princely seed. But he was the clearing breeze that finally awakened the very essence of life from its long slumber. Such tremendous tension had forged a mighty entity of the very first storms and atmospheric winds to sweep across the primordial landscape. Ancient texts introduce this dynamic force of raw nature as the great air god Enlil. He was born directly inside the suffocatingly tight space separating his locked parents. It was a necessary phase in our cosmic evolution which required a powerful catalyst to tear its inflexible elements apart. With a sudden and explosive burst of energy, this young storm god took his very first breath. His deep inhalation manifested as a terrifying primeval wind of unmatched ferocity. Sumerian scholars would later give a name to this raging force, the Imhul wind. It tore through that airless prison with a deafening roar and pure unrelenting power. Rushing currents forced themselves aggressively into those tiny fractures, deepening them. The sheer physical strength and gravity of this sweeping storm pushed relentlessly against the walls of their boundaries. It forcefully drove the sky god An upward into an infinite dark expanse, while simultaneously pressing the earth goddess Ki downward, driving apart their eternal embrace to make way for a grand new expansion. Vast empty space was finally established by way of this single momentous act, separating our terrestrial Earth from the glowing stars above. The opening expanse created a breathable environment where organic life could eventually exist, laying the crucial groundwork for all future biological development. And this part of the lore is particularly profound, because the separation of An and Ki wasn't just a random clashing of chaotic particles. It was the ultimate birth of space itself that allowed reality to truly expand. This moment signifies the transition from a world of pacified silence to a universe of unbridled potential. Just think about the immense implications hidden within these cuneiform records. By pushing the heavens away, Enlil didn't just create a breathable atmosphere, he established the very concept of the horizon itself, giving future mortal minds a vast, starry canvas to look up at in quiet wonder. It serves as a universal reminder that every breath of open air we take could be the direct inheritance of a sacred primordial compromise that forever changed the architecture of the night. Yet this monumental event carried a tragic consequence for the displaced father of the heavens. pushed to the absolute furthest reaches of our universe, he stepped completely out of that physical middle realm where humanity would someday dwell. And though he would remain the undeniable king of the gods for eons to come, he would become incredibly distant and isolated, serving as a silent guardian of the star-speckled sky. His majestic presence faded into a silent and abstract memory, far removed from everyday terrestrial affairs. An became a retired figure of Sumerian mythology, watching passively from beyond those fixed stars, while his celestial form drifted away into quiet solitude. The earth goddess experienced a magnificent transformation. Ki underwent a remarkable metamorphosis from a crushed static mound of soil into a fertile and living canvas. Her previously hardened form softened wonderfully under the refreshing breezes and gentle rain, her tangled hair sprouting effortlessly into the first marshy grasses blowing gently in the wind. Her internal veins of stone opened wide to become hidden underground aquifers, and sweet freshwater springs flowing directly up from the depths of Apsu. These flowing subterranean waters were now perfectly primed to be cultivated by natural forces. Her newly awakened body offered a fertile vessel for the preceding ages of terrestrial growth. The howling Imhul wind eventually settled into a steady rhythmic breeze across her surface. Our unformed world was finally separated into distinct and manageable domains of open sky and soil. However, even with this vital separation complete, the raw, muddy surface remained entirely wild. But it would not last long. Gripped with the sorrow of their parting, An drifted alone through his vast domain of empty space, weeping at the loss of his beloved earth goddess. His divine tears fell downward to splash into the tranquil waters. From this quiet mingling of celestial grief with the primeval sea, an incredibly wise water god named Enki was finally born. He did not emerge into existence at exactly that same time as his older brother, but rather he arrived shortly after those heavens were torn away. This brilliant new deity inherited an immense intellect from his father, and possessed a deep affinity for those subterranean waters of his mother. These new gods desired a highly organized place for living things, and to establish a firmer foundation where towering temples could someday stand securely. It is in this exact wish that the lore tells of a massive feat of geoengineering. For the earliest scribes did not merely envision this sweeping change as a purely natural force of evolution. Instead, they described the careful attention the gods put into shaping our early Earth. To achieve this ambitious goal, water god's son, Marduk, constructed a massive woven reed raft and cast it adrift to float lazily upon the endless primeval waters of the southern Gulf. It served as a brilliant structural base for a monumental task of earthly cultivation. He began to scoop up loose dirt and mud from surrounding murky depths, pouring heavy wet soil directly over the floating framework of tightly bound reeds. Layer after layer of dense river silt accumulated upon the drifting foundation. A solid island was slowly formed from the center of a dark marshy void. His divine hands packed the loose dirt down tightly to ensure a completely secure and firm surface. The sheer pressure of this meticulous packing forced excess moisture out of the newly created landmass. The deity then carefully carved deep winding pathways to drain any remaining water away. These beautifully sprawling aquatic veins would eventually become the mighty Tigris and the sweeping Euphrates rivers. These winding pathways of fresh water represent the literal lifeblood of civilization, flowing smoothly to sustain both the fields of humanity and the sanctuaries of the gods. Their continuous flow carried sweet fresh water through the heart of our developing plains. Our world was finally gifted with its very first stable ground in a magnificent act of divine engineering that conquered the chaotic uncertainty which prevailed before. The early scribes weren't merely describing the physical origins of the soil, but rather the elegant introduction of design, purpose, and conscious intelligence into a blank void. The raw physical environment was now perfectly shaped to host a flourishing civilization. Yet this freshly molded landscape was still waiting for a deeper structural purpose and design to guide its future. A stable platform of packed earth required something more than just dry dirt to thrive. The raw physics of our universe needed to be governed by unbending cosmic laws. Before the younger, vibrant deities could build their sweeping cities, these guiding rules of reality had to be obtained from an inherent intelligence contained within the ether. Our newly terraformed earth rested patiently beneath an open sky. Vast muddy plains waited in absolute silence for a deeper purpose to guide their future. The raw forces of our universe needed to be governed, for without an orderly system, the untamed world would simply collapse back into chaos. These sacred blueprints of civilization were known to ancient scribes as the Holy May. They dictated every single mathematical equation required for further progress, containing a pure geometry needed to measure endless fields of golden grain and track drifting luminous bodies across the heavenly tapestry. Without this divine instruction, early humanity would never learn to trace the pathways of the wandering stars, to determine the shifting seasons, or understand the intricate system of authority needed to guide a blooming civilization, remaining completely lost. An organized society depended entirely upon these carefully guarded rules. Every sweeping canal required a precise design to flow correctly, hidden guidelines that were absolutely essential for maintaining the natural order. Containing the flawless rules for mathematics, alongside every delicate process of natural harmony, these profound laws would eventually dictate a peaceful rhythm across all mortal life. But the younger, vibrant deities possessed absolutely no access to this vital wisdom, leading to a growing impatience. Before any towering temples could be built upon those flat green valleys, these rules had to be acquired, because all the while this magnificent knowledge still remained tightly clenched in the grip of the older primeval titans, who continued to rule our terrestrial realm through the darkest of times. They governed with a strict hand. Sumerian legends speak of a fierce titan whose powerful reign permeated this era. His name was Enmeshara. He stood as a magnificent sovereign who held absolute, unquestioned dominion over the Holy May. This formidable lord commanded every inch of muddy surface stretching across the early plains, projecting a terrifying authority. His massive presence cast a dark shadow over the land. A heavy atmosphere surrounded his every movement. Enmeshara possessed a deeply terrifying radiance which commanded total submission. His booming voice echoed like distant thunder rolling through an empty canyon. Materialized from the very fabric of reality, this ancient ruler governed the earthly world with an iron fist. He projected a towering aura across the silent world, and did not tolerate even the faintest hint of defiance. His massive form seemed to be carved directly from the thick stone of a primordial mountain, a dark and luminous energy pulsing slowly beneath his hard exterior. He was an incredibly formidable figure who inspired deep fear across the silent void. Yet his true throne remained anchored deep within silent, lightless caverns of the expansive underworld. These hidden roots provided a heavily grounding force for the power he held over the earthly domain, where he alone reigned supreme. Ancient scholars referred to his primary title as Lu-Gal-Du Kuga, which beautifully translates to the proud lord of the Holy Mound, known as Dooku. that original and most sacred mountain of heaven and earth. This primeval cosmic landscape served as an isolated fortress of ancient knowledge. Here the unbending rules of reality were first crystallized within its revered soil. It functioned as a heavily guarded sanctuary, one which was completely inaccessible to the younger generations. This holy mound still rose sharply from flat plains like a jagged tooth of rock. It was a completely isolated fortress, surrounded by miles of barren dirt. Only the oldest generation of deities dared to approach its steep slopes. A heavy, suffocating pressure blanketed the sacred soil of this elevated peak, warning away any curious travelers. Brilliant celestial magic hummed quietly throughout its packed earthen foundations. While this towering sanctuary stood proudly above ground, its deep roots reached far downward, deep beneath the earth's surface. These massive roots connected directly to his dark underworld domain, a heavy anchor for his subterranean power. This deep connection ensured that his shadowy influence permeated every layer of early existence. But a restless ambition began to slowly stir among vibrant new deities of the celestial assembly. Figures such as Enlil, alongside a brave warrior known as Ninurta, gazed down upon the raw potential lying within those divine designs. They watched this ancient titan with an intense jealousy burning in their hearts, finding it entirely unfair for such intelligence to be kept hidden from them. They desperately desired to use those sacred laws to organize the wild lands, wishing to build sweeping cities and towering temples across the green valleys. They envisioned a perfectly ordered world blooming with vibrant new life. This bright vision stood in stark contrast to the dark severity of older titans. Secret hushed meetings were held in distant shaded corners of their newly formed sky. These vibrant gods began to actively scheme in a daring act of rebellion. Thick storm clouds gathered rapidly along the stretching horizon. Their whispered plans signaled an impending end to the long era of unmoving stillness created by the primordial titans. A brilliant new age of divine organization rapidly approached our resting earth. Meanwhile, the older gods were not blind to this growing revolt brewing above them. They felt a shifting of cosmic gears echoing down through solid rock. Some began amassing their own dark forces in response to such arrogant ambition. Deep within his underground stronghold, Enmeshara surrounded himself in the terrifying presence of his 7 demonic sons as he prepared for all-out war between the generations. These shadowy offspring were known to ancient scribes as the fearsome 7 Sabiti demons, who waited restlessly in darkness to defend his absolute control over the earth. A fierce loyalty bound these demonic children tightly to their towering father. They hungered for a chance to crush any rebels who dared to approach. Their unstable energy swirled dangerously within the lightless abyss of the underworld. They represented the raw, unshaped anger of an earth that refused to be tamed, craving a violent clash. These elemental storm demons embodied a raw, chaotic spark of primordial craftsmanship. They represented disease and sheer stark terror, while commanding the ferocious tempests of an unstable sky. Their horrifying shapes shifted constantly within a dark subterranean throne room, refusing to take solid shape while they guarded Enmeshara's throne. Tensions between the ever-growing family of vibrant younger deities and their ancestors quickly reached a boiling point. Invisible shockwaves rippled violently through the world in a rising noise, which disturbed the peaceful slumber of many ancient gods resting deep underground. It sent gentle tremors through solid rock to signal a coming rupture. Our entire universe hovered on an absolute precipice of war. The peaceful stillness of our early Earth was about to be permanently shattered with deafening roars that would soon echo downward into sweet freshwater depths, igniting a legendary battle. These deafening sounds were not born from a sudden clash of weapons, at least not at first. They began instead as a slow and rhythmic rumble of industry, echoing downward from bustling settlements into the sweet freshwater depths. The world was rapidly filling with the vibrant energy of young deities working tirelessly to shape their damp environment. Descendants of the very silt giants that formed our slowly shifting continents. Lesser gods known to ancient scribes as the Igigi multiplied quickly across green river valleys to expand the celestial design, taking over the heavy task of cultivating the earth. Their relentless reshaping of the land created an agonizing clamor, cutting straight through the heavy silence of their primordial history. This booming noise of early progress carried a deeply disruptive frequency down through thickly packed layers of soil. The endless shouting of this workforce, combined with the growing pantheon of Anunnaki gods, drifted deep into a submerged sanctuary belonging to the sleeping freshwater deity, known as Apsu. He was an ancient father of the primordial titans, the literal embodiment of the fresh underground aquifers, who desired nothing more than absolute stillness for his eternal rest. Instead, the vibrations from above completely deprived him of his peaceful slumber beneath those muddy banks. The echoes of hammering stones bounced constantly across the glassy surface of his quiet domain. Driven entirely mad by the fatigue, this primordial titan sought counsel from his chaotic vizier, named Nammu. His patience finally shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces under the crushing weight of perpetual exhaustion. He knew he had to do something. Together they formulated a devastating plan to permanently silence the arrogant younger generation, deciding that the undisturbed silence of their earliest days could only be restored by eliminating every ambitious deity working tirelessly above them. A sinister plot to wipe away all blooming life hovered dangerously close on the horizon. Nammu leaned closely toward his master, whispering dark words of encouragement into the shadows. This only served to fuel the bitter rage that was already burning deeply within his aquatic lord. Apsu listened to this sinister advice with an unsettling satisfaction, allowing such intense fury to completely overtake his normally tranquil spirit. This simmering anger quickly manifested in a very tangible way, causing a peaceful ocean of fresh water to boil with sudden intensity. Heavy currents began to crash aggressively against muddy riverbanks as the enraged deity prepared to unleash a devastating flood upon those unsuspecting gods above. A swelling tide of dark water gathered immense strength within the lightless abyss, threatening to wash away everything in its path. A total reset of the earthly garden seemed absolutely certain as these ancient shadows conspired in the darkness. But the brilliantly clever water god Enki uncovered their dark intentions before they could come to fruition. Also known to Babylonian scholars by his later title of Ea, he recognized that brute physical force would ultimately fail against his primordial ancestor. While the sacred blueprints still remained tightly guarded by older titans, Enki relied entirely upon the internal brilliance from which he had been born. He drew deeply from that immense intellect inherited directly from his celestial father, An. This profound wisdom, combined with the tranquil essence of his aquatic mother, allowed him to forge a unique power completely outside the laws of early creation. Relying upon a highly sophisticated magic of esoteric incantations, this wise deity formulated a far more elegant solution to save our world. He acted swiftly, carefully weaving a masterful spell of pure aquatic resonance to subdue the gathering threat, waiting in the depths. This soothing vibration of celestial logic was cast gently over those deep waters to quiet the roaring tempest. His melodic hum drifted lazily through the submerged caverns to wrap around the angry primeval god. Slowly, a heavy slumber washed across the vast expanse of that freshwater abyss, calming the Titan's very soul and pulling him into an inescapable trance of unreachable depths. While Apsu slept, his brilliant victor chose a peaceful path of resolution. Rather than seeking punishment, Enki refused to harm his ancestor outright, deciding instead to keep him in the endless slumber he so desperately wanted, permanently neutralizing his rage. The ancient god's nourishing soul had been spared, his sweet waters flowing endlessly to the dense surface to fertilize the world above for ages yet to come. The young water god stripped Apsu of his radiant crown to claim that vast and deeply submerged domain as his own personal sanctuary. He proceeded to build his magnificent new palace directly atop those slumbering remains resting below. It would be referred to from there on as Apsu, meaning House of the Abyss. With the former ruler at peace, divine attention quickly turned toward his terrified vizier. Mumu's very essence represented the raw, unshaped spark of primordial craftsmanship that desperately needed to be controlled with a firm hand. Enki captured this chaotic entity by fashioning a magical collar of woven spells tightly around his neck, taking him into his newly claimed abyss to establish a firm celestial boundary for our future. This captivity was viewed not as a harsh punishment, but as a calming redirection of the wild, unfocused energy. Mummu was stripped of his independent will to serve a much higher structural purpose. Locked securely away inside those glowing halls, this once volatile spark became a permanent engine of creative skill, settling quietly into the depths. He was made to passively feed the gentle mechanisms driving the progression of our universe. He now hummed with a steady and predictable pulse that safely regulated the organized cosmos turning slowly above. A beautifully structured reality was finally allowed to flourish. Little did he know this defining moment would come to spark further conflict, leading to far more intense wars yet to spread across the cosmos. For these primordial gods were not the only deities becoming growingly unhappy with the new hierarchy. Enki's masterful subduing of an ancient regime sent a harsh ripple effect throughout the boundless cosmic ocean. Deep within those salty, heaving depths of the outer seas, a powerful goddess was overwhelmed with the sudden loss of her partner. Tiamat began to churn aggressively as she realized her husband had been permanently overthrown. But instead of striking out immediately, she sank slowly into her deepest currents to quietly develop her own plans. Leaving those sweet waters of the deep entirely undisturbed and allowing the water god's newly established sanctuary to settle into absolute tranquility. The resulting air of calm, no matter how fragile, gave the wise water god a safe place to finally establish his magnificent palace of quiet reflection. And this part of the legend is uniquely comforting, because his mastery wasn't just the displacement of an older order, it was a beautiful harmonization of the earth's deepest waters. Through this gentle gesture of eternal rest, the clever deity demonstrated that true wisdom lies in redirecting unformed energies into a state of helpful cooperation. It signals an enduring promise that beneath the surfaces of our lives there exists a serene, protected stillness, holding everything together in perfect safety. Think about the immense implications of a world where a once wild spark is gently reshaped into a steady, predictable pulse of creativity. This change suggests that the first scribes to record the most sacred secrets of our origins viewed the universe not as inherently unstable, but as a masterfully designed home built upon layers of quiet grace and enduring balance. As we let our thoughts drift into this peaceful expanse, we are wrapped in the absolute security of a beautifully ordered world where the ancient currents of the deep carry us away, cradling our resting consciousness in their restorative waters. Though many of those earliest titans would come to fade into the shadows as the Anunnaki gods took control over the heavens, those first architects of existence embraced their quiet departure with a deeply respectful grace, their motionless bodies providing a necessary anchor for all subsequent layers of early creation. Without their quiet submission, our universe would have never gained a steady footing. They walked into the shadows to serve the much higher structural purpose for our entire reality, but their magnificent legacy would never be truly forgotten. Echoes of their lingering presence can be found woven throughout countless mythologies, down through all subsequent ages yet to come. They provide stability from below, so that those on the surface could thrive in the open air, transforming a swirling energy into an absolutely secure foundation built upon permanent stone. An enduring peace washed over the ancient earth, settling softly across every hidden corner of the lower depths. This moment of absolute calm wrapped around the hidden abyss where the wise water god now rested safely upon his newly established throne. He watched over a slow turning of planetary spheres. His shimmering underwater haven remained entirely safe from the shifting winds. Shimmering turquoise currents flowed continuously through the halls of polished waterstone. Radiant light filled every wide corridor. Smooth earthen walls hummed with a quiet vibration. Every sculpted pillar served as a silent guardian, reflecting this profound harmony within their smooth forms. Luminous ceilings arched gracefully overhead to form a protective dome over this quiet domain. Soft reflections shimmered continuously across those polished floors, creating a mesmerizing visual dance. It was a place where raw elemental forces were perfectly tamed by a supreme and gentle presence. Pathways carved from pure minerals guided clear liquid streams, carrying peaceful vibrations throughout those halls. Every structure resonated with an undeniable natural harmony, designed to soothe even the most powerful immortal minds. The gentle tides of a restorative silence flowed through to those lowest depths. Resting in the pacified stillness of this realm allowed one's energy to become revitalized within its borders. Sweet underground waters were finally free to settle into a state of glassy perfection, holding unimaginable depth. A gentle rhythmic hum of ancient magic began to drift lazily through the softly churning waves. This soothing vibration carried an undeniable promise of enduring stability for our entire unfolding universe. It washed over every smooth stone surface to create a flawlessly insulated bubble of safety. Secret reservoirs maintained the flawless equilibrium between those hidden depths below and the far-reaching skies above. Every single drop of liquid carried a soothing resonance, designed to gently nurture all organic growth. Their slowly sweeping currents acted as a continuous lullaby, moving with a graceful ebb and flow. They wrapped their cooling embrace around the stone roots of our oldest mountain ranges. Sweet moisture rose upward through thick layers of packed soil to provide invisible nourishment for every spark of life flourishing above. These tranquil underground rivers carried a deeply restorative power, capable of healing any exhausted land. Their gentle flow ensured that sprawling green valleys would always receive necessary hydration. This beautiful system of cosmic balance functioned with undeniable grace, deep beneath those marshy riverbanks. More than that, they held an eternal memory of the cosmos safely within their gentle embrace. They absorbed every single whispered secret from the earliest days, before time itself began to drift forward. It was a perfect reflection of the continuous nature contained in our vast timeline, where an endless procession of ages flowed like a slow river before merging into a much larger cosmic ocean. We can now allow our own tired minds to drift slowly downward into those cool and tranquil waters, where the gravity of the surface simply dissolves into this silent, floating serenity of our oceans. Sinking deeper into its welcoming embrace, a soft blanket wraps securely around our floating forms. The warmth of a sun-kissed day gives way to twilight, painting the horizon in vivid colors which reflect off of the watery surface before fading off into the folds of night. Gentle turquoise currents guide our wandering thoughts. A comforting shadow presses softly against our closed eyes, summoning deeply restorative dreams as we surrender completely to a magnificent celestial rhythm that has governed this world since its beginning. Our rhythmic breathing synchronizes flawlessly with the slowly turning rotation of those distant planetary spheres overhead, allowing us to become one with the magical frequencies vibrating around us. Such cosmic harmony effortlessly washes away all remaining traces of weariness. Our consciousness drifts peacefully into a floating sensation of absolute tranquility, leaving the tangible world behind. Slipping seamlessly into a state of complete relaxation, every single part of our being surrenders to the comforting silence, holding our universe firmly together. A gentle celestial luminance stretches out into an endless horizon of pure starlight, filtering through the calm liquid canopy, where we rest securely inside a continuous chain of eternal memory, reaching back toward the very first dawn. The separation of the heavens from the earth established the horizon, but it also created a new kind of tension. As the younger Anunnaki began to shape the wild lands, digging canals and building the first cities, they created a clamor that reached the deepest corners of the abyss, upsetting the cosmic balance carefully set in place and preferred by the older gods. Those slumbering lords of the freshwater depths did not care for this industry. Their desire for eternal silence was absolute, and the noise of progress became an outright act of war. What began as an era of patient growth now shifted into a violent struggle for the very laws that govern the physics of our reality. The peace of the primordial waters is over. The great rebellion of the gods has begun. What if everything we have come to accept about the natural formation of our universe is merely a carefully crafted illusion, hiding a far more interesting mystery, hidden deeply in Sumerian records? It's an easy idea to dismiss, at least it is at first, because what many of us probably don't know is that out of the thousands of written texts that have been slowly uncovered from the sandy remnants of ancient Mesopotamia, only a tiny fraction, just around 10%, have ever been translated and catalogued. What other mysteries may lie waiting within those unread tablets of hard-baked clay? Because the small handful of records we can read reveal an origin story of breathtaking scale. Ages before the Babylonians wrote down the legendary triumphs of the Enuma Elish, the ancient scribes of Sumer had already charted a similar origin story that started long before the first trace of structural order. Tonight, we allow our minds to drift past the familiar geometry of distant, twinkling lights suspended in the night sky, to explore the lesser-known history of the Anunnaki gods and the events that finally allowed mortal life to take its very first breath. These incredible creation myths offer a small glimpse into a forgotten time hidden carefully within the infinite folds of our collective history. And it should not be overlooked, because this was no mere small feat of rebellion. It was the biggest shift our young Earth had ever witnessed. It cannot be a simple mistake that some of the oldest civilizations of mankind left behind dedicated records of this polarizing cosmic war, one that permanently shifted the boundaries of the world as they knew it. Here, ancient clay tablets detail a multi-fronted battle between the rising Anunnaki gods and their far older primordial ancestors. Immense giants whose immortal hold over the vast secrets of our universe had reigned supreme for countless millennia before the dawn of the first light, before the first spark of life walked upon muddy plains, and long, long before the first kings were said to have descended from the heavens to guide the primeval cities of antiquity. Join us as we embark on the second part of our journey to reveal how the seized gods of Mesopotamian lore were forcibly overthrown to make way for a bountiful earthly paradise, one which was capable of nurturing the countless species of life yet to sip from the sweet fresh waters bubbling up from the Apsu, gaze into the star-speckled sky, or walk upon the muddy banks of ancient Sumerian plains. Through the slowly recovered remnants of mysterious cuneiform records, we trace the defeat of Enmeshera alongside his 7 demonic sons, as well as the glorious battle of Tiamat and Kingu, to understand how this terrifying reign of lost titans finally lost control. Those original architects of creation fiercely guarded the sacred celestial blueprints, known to early priests as the Holy May, and exclusively possessed the glowing Tablet of Destinies, keeping their infinite knowledge away from the curious eyes of their growingly ambitious descendants. The sheer stakes of possessing such universe-altering power cannot be understated. It is said that every physical law of nature depended entirely upon whoever held those powerful earthen ledgers, which served both as the intrinsic knowledge of the very ether itself, as well as the eternal energy which drives it to manifest. And the coming war over such vast wisdom would change the very face of the earth forever. Before we continue, I'd love to know where and when this quiet journey has found you. Leave a comment below with your city and the hour where you are right now. There is something quietly comforting about realizing that countless listeners, scattered across distant lands and different time zones, are all settling into the same quiet journey through the forgotten echoes of human history. Also, if these late-night journeys into the ancient world bring you rest or even help you drift off, consider subscribing. It helps this quiet community grow and allows us to keep bringing you more of these peaceful stories to share. For uninterrupted sleep and longer versions, you can also join the Legends of the Dawn membership. Now, let the noise of the present fade. Tonight, we journey back thousands of years to continue our story, when Apsu lay permanently entranced in his eternal slumber. The invisible shockwaves of this divine insurrection by the water god Enki surged rapidly across the quiet terrestrial plains of our Earth. The raw subterranean malice of the deep was about to clash violently against the bright and purifying winds of the shining new pantheon. Deafening roars of a divine conflict building on the horizon of those turbulent salty seas and within the deepest depths of the earth itself. Our exploration begins by peering deeply into the dark waters of that endless primordial ocean, where a fierce goddess named Tiamat had retreated into those lightless depths to mourn the sudden loss of her husband. She rested quietly within a hidden chasm as she wept bitterly. But her reigning companions would not allow her despair to remain a mere peaceful act of grieving. They resented their descendants for daring to overthrow such a powerful entity of their own hierarchy, and lamented to Tiamat how their relentless noise was just as tiresome to them as it had been for her partner, who had now been silenced forever. Complaints that rang all too true in Tiamat's hollowed eyes, reflected perfectly in every tear which dispersed silently into her watery domain. They convinced her to devise an inescapable retribution against their rebellious descendants, leading her to take on a new and much darker form. This monstrous aura did not define her entire character. It was a direct result of the loss of her beloved partner. Long before the tragic overthrow of Apsu occurred, she possessed a boundless maternal nature that was entirely passive, serving as the very embodiment of the salty seas themselves. The earliest scribes portrayed her as the literal raw matter of primeval creation, providing a gentle, nurturing suspension for all organic life that was patiently waiting to bloom. But this shocking betrayal by the younger deities had fundamentally altered her soul. Her profound sorrow twisted rapidly into an unquenchable thirst for vengeance, encouraged by the other titans who sympathized with her rage. The silent depths of her aquatic kingdom began to echo with a terrifying new resonance, as her once passive waters boiled over with an unimaginable sorrow that shook the very foundation of our entire world. Heaving currents stirred aggressively to reshape her boundless essence into a formidable weapon. She was no longer just a serene ocean, but a colossal force of nature preparing to strike a devastating blow. She took on the morphing form of a massive dragon, possessing vast-scaled wings which could blacken the entire sky, and a belly which could expand to swallow the heavens whole. Her massive form was shrouded in thick shadows which seemed to morph and shift as though alive with the venomous intent which now poisoned her very veins. Some say her shifting form seemed unable to decide between her more tangible draconian form and the shadows of a raging tempest filled with darkly swirling waters. The sheer magnitude of her unstable silhouette painted a terrifying picture against the murky oceanic floor. Thick scales of impenetrable armor began to slowly encrust her swirling body. Venomous fangs grew sharply within a cavernous maw that was eager to tear apart the carefully constructed foundations of our earthly garden. A massive tempest was preparing to rise from those salty depths to permanently shatter the shining shrines of the young Anunnaki gods. Dark storms of maternal wrath gathered heavily along the distant horizon of that endless outer sea. But her strategy was not yet complete, for to fight such an expansive and bright new generation, she would need the help of creatures just as fierce as her opponents. From the darkly churning depths of her salt waters, Tiamat gave birth to 11 horrifying species of primordial monsters. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because ancient clay tablets don't just detail the creation of a vast army of fierce warriors with shiny weapons. They describe these terrifying creations as a twisting horde of venomous dragons, multi-headed hydra-like serpents, hairy beasts, fierce demons, and twisted scorpion hybrids. They stood as the physical manifestations of the oceanic friction churning endlessly within those chaotic depths, possessing a heart of pure malice that was eager to lend aid. Their shifting silhouettes carried a raw, destructive energy that promised absolute ruin for any opposing forces. Razor-sharp fangs dripped with a toxic poison in anticipation of a brewing war for celestial dominance. Even still, Tiamat did not intend to wage this monumental cosmic war with her army alone. Along with her new army, she rallied the remaining generation of displaced primordial deities to stand firmly by her side. These older gods were absolutely furious at the arrogant behavior displayed by the Anunnaki gods, wishing to restore their own ancient supremacy. Such a massive uprising completely polarized our early universe, splitting the immortal hierarchy into 2 incompatible factions preparing for battle. To lead this terrifying new army into combat, a towering figure known as Quingu was selected. The primeval sea goddess elevated this arrogant prince of deep water to become her new consort and supreme commander. He served as a fiercely loyal general who was suddenly raised far beyond his original station. Tiamat placed her absolute trust in his abilities. He proudly accepted his heavy burden to lead her army of monsters, projecting a terrifying authority that commanded total submission from his troops lurking in the abyss. Then came a moment of monumental cosmic significance. She pressed the radiant tablet of destinies directly onto his broad chest to legitimize his command, solidifying his full executive control over all reality itself. This magnificent artifact functioned very differently from those sacred blueprints known as Holy May. While those earlier designs held pure instructions for establishing civilization, they did not directly dictate destiny. Rather, it held the esoteric magic capable of overriding the fundamental laws governing our universe, reshaping the every fabric of existence. Quingu wore it proudly as an impenetrable breastplate, radiating a corrupting aura of stolen authority and pure power. He used its blinding light to organize his serpentine forces into an unstoppable wave. Armed with such universe-altering power, this newly appointed general prepared his aquatic vanguard for an impending catastrophic assault. Yet these churning waters were not the only realm reaching its tipping point. A separate insurrection was gathering strength upon the dry terrestrial plains of the West, to similarly challenge those shining heavens. That same shockwave of divine displacement had successfully fueled a growing resentment within another ancient lord. The Anunnaki found themselves surrounded from all directions by displaced generations of their heritage, creating a friction that would soon set off a massive revolution, engulfing every single layer of the early cosmos. The sudden displacement of power had subtly poisoned Enmisharas's mind, his fury growing with each passing minute. He was a towering entity who controlled the fundamental laws of the universe. In his earliest days he rested deep within the packed soil, holding immense authority upon the cosmic mountain, known to early priests as Dooku. But his once everlasting patience was eroding rapidly. Enmishara had now witnessed these descendants' growing desire to overthrow the established primordial order, which had reigned supreme long before these younger gods were ever even thought of. His own bitter hatred toward this shining new pantheon multiplied just as endlessly as the Anunnaki gods themselves, as he watched their aggressive earthly expansion, leading him to tighten his formidable grip upon those sacred celestial blueprints of creation, known to ancient priests as the Holy May. He would formulate his own strategy to regain full control of the universe, while the dragon goddess and her monstrous army lurked in the stormy seas to the east, gathering strength. And while these flawless instructions for civilization remained tightly locked away from any envious eyes, the towering Titan surrounded himself with his 7 terrifying sons, princes of darkness, known as the 7 demons of Mesopotamian lore. They would help him prepare for an inevitable clash of generations, waiting patiently for their moment to strike. These fearsome dark entities hungered for an opportunity to defend his absolute sovereignty over our earth, waiting eagerly for their father's final command to wage a brutal war. Their volatile energy swelled dangerously as an invisible tension pushed our entire universe closer toward the brink of annihilation. The peaceful stasis of our early Earth was about to be permanently shattered by deafening roars of impending divine conflict. That deafening clamor of progress had successfully awakened a sleeping malice that would soon consume the entire world. Enmishara finally called upon his 7 terrifying sons to unleash the power of their tempests. Together, this titan and his demonic princes launched a massive assault striking against the luminous shrines of the skies. This horde of shadowy demons ravaged the green plains, tearing through quiet settlements with unrelenting ferocity. Their chaotic forms blotted out the pale moonlight entirely, plunging the world back into the absolute darkness from which it was formed. Thick dust storms whipped violently across flat mud brick pathways. What structured geometry had been constructed within those early sanctuaries of the young gods soon began to crumble under such immense pressure. Though later traditions would often attribute their roles to the volatile war god, the earliest accounts of this catastrophic event reveal that two different champions were forced to wage a massive counterattack. Amongst all this chaos, the mighty air god Enlil stood bravely alongside his warrior son Ninurta as they prepared to defend their shining palaces. These two luminous deities descended rapidly, meeting the advancing swarm of shadowy princes with blinding flares of sheer solar energy. Deafening thunder echoed endlessly across the deep valleys below as these opposing forces finally collided. Tempest winds battered heavily against impenetrable rock. They swirled like massive tornadoes of pure malice across our flat delta. Ancient riverbeds boiled under an intense heat radiating from their phantom shapes, but Ninurta wielded fierce atmospheric storms to push back against the creeping tide. He fought with unmatched bravery to protect those fragile boundaries of existence, while Enlil bellowed commands from a high vantage point to coordinate their divine defense. His booming voice carried a purifying clarity that shattered thick illusions woven by the old titans. A staggering display of celestial power washed over dry dirt, while divine geometry pierced through thick clouds of swirling dust. Searing heat from cosmic fires baked muddy riverbanks and turned them into hardened crusts of stone. Ninurta pressed his relentless attack forward. His radiant armor gleamed brightly against an oppressive gloom covering our ancient sky, but the towering titan refused to yield his ancient sovereignty quietly. He drew upon a boundless reservoir of dark magic buried deep within our planetary crust. His shadowy fingers reached upward as he attempted to tear down those shimmering stars from their seemingly fixed orbits, leading Enlil to direct his brave son to strike, aiming at the very heart of his cosmic mountain. Ninurta answered this call by summoning a blinding tempest of righteous lightning. He hurled his glowing weapons downward in a brilliant flash of solar energy which temporarily blinded those dark shadows, and Meshara watched his shadowy dominion slowly buckle under the relentless barrage. His bitter pride swelled, and he prepared to unleash a devastating wave of subterranean magic. Our Earth itself shuddered under such immense weight of colliding errors, for every physical law of nature depended entirely upon whoever emerged victorious from this brutal siege. Those sacred blueprints contained within the holy May hung precariously in a balance. The Anunnakis' simple desire for expansion now morphed into a dire necessity to obtain the power capable of securing their continued existence. A heavy curtain of absolute silence briefly fell over those ravaged plains. It was a terrifying pause that preceded an ultimate clash of immortals. This breathless hush wasn't just a temporary break in the story, but a heavy, meaningful moment where the entire future of existence waited to be decided. It was an incredible cosmic crossroad, a necessary pivot between a time of endless, unformed sleep and the organized reality we now reside in. When we look back on this defining moment in our past, we can see how the entire expanse of the sky and earth hung in a delicate balance just before everything changed. This particular moment is so fascinating because it shows us that the greatest shifts in our collective memory often begin in absolute stillness. The clay records invite us to ponder how the deep foundations of nature had to be dismantled so that a protective canopy could safely unfold overhead. In that vast, expectant space, everything was catching its breath, easing into the definitive alignment that would forever reshape our sleeping Earth. Both sides gathered their remaining strength for a monumental confrontation, because while these atmospheric gods battered at the terrestrial titan, an equally horrifying threat was quickly approaching from those salty depths to the east. Our fragile universe was completely engulfed and trapped in a blinding maelstrom of colliding forces. An invisible tether of mutual resentment bound these two massive insurrections together in a state of pure chaos. The Anunnaki pantheon found themselves stretched impossibly thin across dual battlefields. They battled Enmeshara and his demons, all while anxiously monitoring the brewing storm overtaking the salty seas. An apocalyptic duel between ocean waters and open skies waited patiently on the distant horizon. Just imagine the sheer pressure of that moment. This wasn't just a simple struggle for territory, but a massive breaking point where the young gods became entirely surrounded by their own ancient ancestry. As we follow this thread from the beginning of all creation to the sweeping wars of later years, we can clearly see that the conflict on land was only the beginning of a much larger cosmic crisis. It is so fascinating to look back at these clay records and see how the ancient priests framed this ultimate test of the heavens. Because the deepest danger wasn't just the battle raging on land, but the unpredictable, rising tide of the great abyss itself. Everything the younger generation had worked to build was suddenly pushed to the absolute edge, right as the endless waters began to shift. Paralyzing terror would quickly grip these younger deities as Tiamat finally advanced. A crushing weight of impending doom settled heavily over luminous shrines of our sky. Our ancient cosmos was about to be tested beyond any measurable limits of mortal comprehension. Tiamat brought forth her venomous army of monsters to wash away every shining trace of divine progress. Ancient clay tablets reveal that the great Skyfather An did at first attempt to halt her devastating march. He was quickly followed by a clever water god named Ea, otherwise known as Enki, who sought to pacify her swirling tides. This well-meaning titan of the upper atmospheres and younger water god approached the roaring sea matriarch with hopes of preserving a fragile peace. They stepped cautiously toward the endless outer ocean that boiled with pure chaotic malice, yet they found themselves completely overwhelmed by her unforgiving presence. Both deities turned back toward their high sanctuaries in an absolute defeat. Their profound celestial logic simply could not penetrate the thick fog surrounding her twisted hybrid creations. A heavy atmosphere of pure despair settled slowly over luminous halls of the heavens. Their brilliant organizing magic seemed entirely powerless against such raw chaos rising from the abyss. Tiamat's monstrous forces promised to wipe out everything in their path and permanently extinguish the comforting silver light of countless distant stars with their shadowy essence. A terrified celestial assembly retreated into their deepest chambers to await an inevitable ruin, as massive salt waves crashed aggressively against their fragile borders. A paralyzing cold drifted through those towering mud-brick temples. It seemed that a beautifully ordered world was destined to dissolve back into a silent, lightless void. But just as absolute darkness prepared to swallow the heavens, another brilliant Anunnaki hero boldly stepped forward. Scribes recorded his name as Marduk, the courageous son of the wise water deity Enki. He refused to cower in the shadows while his vibrant world was completely unmade. This young hero possessed a unique mastery over those most volatile atmospheric winds and the esoteric magic of the deep freshwater oceans directly from his ancient father. Marduk recognized that such an apocalyptic threat required a champion of unparalleled power. He walked proudly into the center of the fearful divine assembly to present a staggering cosmic demand. He requested that older gods grant him absolute kingship over our entire universe. That was his required price for acting as their final defense against the sea. A desperate pantheon quickly agreed to surrender their highest celestial crowns to this brave savior. They transferred their immense collective power into his capable hands to forge an ultimate weapon of deliverance. Older deities rejoiced as this young champion accepted his heavy burden to protect their vulnerable earthly garden. With his supreme destiny officially sealed, the brilliant champion began his careful preparations for a magnificent duel. Marduk did not rely upon standard earthly bronze to fight an ocean of pure chaotic malice. He chose instead to arm himself with the very raw and untamed forces belonging to the upper atmosphere. This radiant god crafted a magnificent bow from those swirling tempests of a darkening sky. He grasped roaring gales to fashion arrows of blinding fire, its intense solar energy filling his very body. It radiated outward to pierce the thick fog rolling off those angry seas. He wrapped his immortal form in a protective armor woven from crackling lightning and deafening thunder. This young king then mounted a terrifying storm chariot to prepare for his devastating descent. 4 massive celestial beasts were harnessed tightly to this roaring divine carriage. They stomped their heavy hooves against the starry vault with an insatiable hunger for battle. His brilliant illumination painted a breathtaking silhouette against the murky horizon of those eastern waters. Marduk stood ready to ride directly into the creeping darkness that threatened to consume our fragile earth. Our entire cosmos held its breath as this single savior prepared to meet an impossible battalion. Of course, the dragon goddess did not wait passively for this radiant challenger to arrive. She gathered her poisonous legion, her elevated general Quingu standing ready at her side. Meanwhile, the sprawling landscape to the west still groaned under the heavy weight of dark shadows ravaging those mud-brick cities. The younger gods would need to gather every last enduring ounce of brilliant energy to shatter those subterranean kingdoms. The inevitable defeat of Enmeshara waited patiently, hovering just above the arid land. Fierce atmospheric deities had launched a devastating counterattack against that shadowy terrestrial siege. They directed their purifying winds towards the cosmic mountain known to early priests as Dooku. This elevated earthen peak served as a heavily fortified stronghold for the ancient underworld king. Nevertheless, Anunnaki warriors were eventually able to overwhelm the defenses surrounding this primeval fortress with blinding flashes of solar light. Enmeshara at last stood paralyzed as his terrifying princes of darkness were finally subdued. Their absolute dominion over those dry plains was permanently broken by the flawless geometry of celestial spells. Victorious deities quickly descended upon the fallen princes to bind their shifting forms with unbreakable tethers of pure light, and Enmeshara was stripped of his ancient weapons, firmly restrained by the shining assembly of the heavens. This captured family of titans stood completely helpless before their radiant conquerors, as an ultimate judgment of the sky began to unfold. It is here that esoteric interpretations of ancient lore reveal a fascinating detail regarding his original physical form. Because the innermost essence of this towering Lord of the May was not just a swirling vortex of hateful energy. It is said that he possessed an all-consuming cosmic radiance, spoken in ancient tongues as Zimu. This magnificent aura of pure splendor was the very source of the terrifying authority he used to reign across the early world. A blinding light pulsed from his heavy frame to cast long and imposing shadows across flat green valleys. His luminous presence commanded total submission and reverence from any wandering spirits. Yet this breathtaking glow would soon be stripped away by a rising new order. Victorious deities did not destroy this incredible light after conquering that old guard. They instead forcibly removed it to claim its immense power. Scribes suggest this stolen brilliance was permanently reassigned to the young sun god named Shamash, marking an absolute end to his reign. Such a humiliating defeat brought unparalleled desperation to that fallen terrestrial ruler. We are left to wonder if it was that very chilling betrayal by his descendants that ultimately sealed those final moments of the rebellion. For some, fragmented records hint that Enmeshara proceeded to sacrifice his 7 terrifying sons to buy his own eternal safety. He willingly surrendered his loyal offspring to the overwhelming anger belonging to those victorious younger gods, who executed his shadowy princes upon the sacred mountain peak in a fit of rage. To ensure his own survival against this unstoppable celestial justice, he had traded his most fearsome weapons for a quiet exile in the deepest shadows of the underworld. Known to ancient Sumerians as Kur, this was the land of no return, where all souls, no matter how powerful, would eventually find their rest. Yet an even more bitter conclusion awaited the 7 fierce demons who had fought so hard and so valiantly to defend him. Because their untamed essence proved far too deeply ingrained within creation to simply vanish into thin air. The victors would come to transform these defeated demons into brilliant weapons of the night sky, becoming the feared 7 Sabiti demons of Mesopotamian lore. They were permanently bound to a strict servitude under their new Anunnaki masters. These fierce spirits were placed carefully within the glittering constellation known as the Pleiades. They would remain there as an ultimate balancing force for our entire universe. Such profound celestial placement allowed them to take on more solidified forms in later traditions. Their once chaotic fury was channeled into a highly structured purpose and design within that starry vault, perfectly bridging a forgotten epoch with a vibrant new reality. Stripped entirely of the blinding splendor, that old primeval ruler faced the loss of his royal lineage, along with any remaining claims to those terrestrial planes above. His massive body was cast down into the absolute blackness of our deepest underground caverns. He was left to languish in a perpetual darkness far below our packed soil, strictly forbidden from ever reaching out to touch those warming rays of sunshine. Those brilliant solar beams now belonged exclusively to the radiant usurpers. He became a dormant ghost of a dark epoch that our vibrant universe preferred to forget. His towering primeval essence would eventually fade into an endless expanse of forgotten history, whispered of only in myth. But the fallen sovereign still held a deeply respected position, even after his catastrophic fall. He essentially became an ultimate ancestor spirit of that ancient world, his massive resting form acting as the immense and silently sleeping roots of the great world mountain. Despite their rebellion, the Anunnaki did not lose all respect for their powerful primordial ancestors, because even in their triumph, they still offered him solemn funerary sacrifices to honor his foundational presence. They understood that his quiet submission provided the absolute bedrock for all subsequent layers of creation. The profound sacrifice transformed a swirling vortex of emptiness into a secure foundation built upon permanent stone. Our fragile existence rests comfortably upon such heavily fortified ancient pillars, holding up our conscious reality from below, with unwavering endurance. This magnificent terrestrial victory officially cleared a path for a much larger cosmic resolution. Those sacred blueprints known as the Holy May were finally secured by a new hierarchy. Our vast terrestrial front was now safe. When we step back and look closely at these lost legends that have been slowly recovered over time, we realize this wasn't just a physical battle won on the plains, but a total shift in how the universe functions. It represents the exact moment when raw, unmapped forces from the deep earth became the quiet pillars holding up our world. By securing those sacred clay blueprints, the younger gods didn't just win a war, they anchored reality itself. This part of the story carries such massive meaning because it shows us that true balance cannot exist without first honoring the foundational energies that came before. The clay tablets invite us to look at the very ground beneath our feet, not as mere stagnant dirt, but as a living entity of silent respect. Not the kind of respect which must be glaringly obvious. The kind that does not need to be spoken aloud, because it soaks every molecule of our very essence, locked forever within the very core of our origins. But the battle wasn't quite over yet. A lingering shadow still hovered dangerously close to our eastern horizon, where we shift our focus back once more toward those churning outer oceans. The final clash of the gods hovered closely over those churning waters, where Marduk drove his roaring chariot directly into a heavy fog of the primeval sea. His radiance cut perfectly through those thick layers of suffocating mist, like a brilliant sunrise melting away the heavy shadows of the night. Deafening thunder echoed continuously as those beasts of the sky stomped their hooves, carrying him rapidly across the darkening atmosphere. The sheer magnitude of his approach sent violent tremors rippling across the already disturbed surface of our ocean. Purifying light radiated outward from his armor, challenging those deepest shadows of antiquity where Tiamat's evil brood lurked within the swirling chaos. These venomous creations shifted their massive forms nervously as the blinding energy of the sun descended upon them. They had never witnessed such a breathtaking display of supreme authority. Standing proudly at the forefront of this monstrous legion was the prideful commander of the deep, Quingu. He waited for this young challenger with a bitter arrogance, fueling his immortal heart. That glowing ledger of earth remained strapped securely against his broad chest, knowing that the tablet of destinies granted him a supreme capability to reshape the very fabric of existence. Our entire cosmos held its breath as these two immense forces finally closed the remaining distance between them. The young hero did not falter as he approached those monstrous forces. Much the opposite, he directed his divine chariot straight towards that stolen symbol of universal governance. Rather than drawing a physical weapon, Marduk simply locked his penetrating gaze onto the general. This intense stare carried a flawless geometry belonging to an organized universe of structure, and as such it pierced directly through illusions of grandeur wrapping around him. The commander froze, paralyzed. He had been elevated to a position which far exceeded his resolve against such a powerful force. Some interpretations suggest that this moment reflected a sudden realization of his own inadequacy, an underlying truth that shattered his will. His mind simply could not process that pure logic radiating from his opponent. A paralyzing wave of sheer terror gripped his limbs, freezing him right in his place. The stolen matrix of reality pulsed weakly against his chest as his confidence drained away. The vast army of monsters behind him sensed this sudden shift in commanding presence. Every ounce of his stolen bravado evaporated into a cold sweat of absolute dread. This once proud prince of deep water found himself unable to lift a single weapon. He could not even utter a basic command of magic to direct his venomous army of beasts. A total collapse of his psychology left his devoted brood devoid of any leadership. They watched blindly as their supreme general surrendered to humiliating defeat. Marduk brought his thundering chariot to a halt directly beside the paralyzed Titan, reaching out to reclaim that heavy ledger of clay for the younger generation. With one effortless motion, he tore the glowing tablet of destinies away from his frozen opponent, instantly stripping their authority over our cosmos. Our victorious champion proudly pressed this heavy artifact against his own radiant armor. This was no mere symbolic act. It was one which fundamentally shifted the ultimate command over our entire universe. A beautiful resonance of harmony began to pulse softly from its hardened clay vessel to signify its rightful return. But his work was not yet done. Having witnessed her general be incapacitated, the enraged matriarch of our sea was forced to act. Tiamat surged forward from those darkest depths, ready to crush this young rebel herself. Her massive silhouette rose aggressively against the murky horizon of those eastern waters. This fierce goddess of dragons opened her cavernous jaws to swallow our radiant champion whole. Massive waves of salt crashed violently as she threw her colossal weight and raw destructive energy toward those shining heavens. Even so, this young god of storms remained unfazed by her terrifying magnitude. As those terrifying jaws closed around him, he quickly summoned a fierce weapon of our atmosphere. Clay records of antiquity refer to this raging force as the Imhul wind. He drove this violent tempest directly down her throat to block her massive bite. These rushing currents expanded violently within her belly to hold her jaws apart. Her sprawling body was paralyzed entirely by the invisible breath of our sky, where she was pinned helplessly against the stars. Marduk then drew his magnificent bow to release a single arrow of blinding fire. That brilliant shaft of light carried a purifying heat capable of cleansing our entire universe. This intense projectile of our sun tore rapidly through her, splitting her primordial heart and extinguishing the chaotic force of life that fueled her anger. That absolute sovereignty of our young creator was forever cemented in this single moment of devastation. Her colossal form fell motionless upon a dark floor of the ocean, bringing a swift end to her suffocating threat. A profound stillness washed over those churning waters to replace the deafening roar of battle. Her twisted creations watched in absolute disbelief as their seemingly invincible creator was finally slain. Their venomous courage dissolved as they tried to scatter into the deepest shadows of those murky depths. But Marduk would not allow them to escape. He swiftly cast an inescapable cosmic net to bind these 11 species of monsters tightly within heavy chains. These once terrifying phantoms found their destructive weapons trampled into the dark, muddy floor of their primeval battlefield. A great resolution descended over those churning saltwater tides as the roaring tempest finally broke. The deafening clamor of the cosmic war faded into a soft rhythmic lapping of gentle ocean waves. Marduk stood triumphantly over the colossal remnants of that slain sea matriarch, with his radiant golden armor gleaming brightly. He gazed down upon her massive aquatic silhouette against an ocean floor, to formulate a breathtaking act of celestial architecture. This young king recognized that her raw, chaotic matter could be carefully repurposed. He would use her sprawling form to construct an entirely new physical structure for our waking world. Scribes of the Enuma Elish recorded this monumental cosmic shift unfolding slowly across those quiet waters. With one massive strike, he split her boundless aquatic body entirely in 2 parts, like a dried fish. This brilliant storm god hoisted one massive half upward to form an impenetrable dome for our open skies. This heavily reinforced physical barrier was designed specifically to cage those chaotic upper energies of our primeval cosmos. A luminous ceiling prevented that dark surrounding void from ever again flooding down to drown our fragile universe below. He then gathered her remaining lower half to construct the heavy foundations of our terrestrial Earth. Every patch of solid soil beneath mortal feet now rests securely upon those bound silent remnants of a long-lost goddess. Her sacrifice became the vast stage upon which all future human history would eventually play out. Ancient clay tablets paint a highly poetic picture of her final magnificent transformation into our surrounding natural environment. It is said that her cold eyes were pierced to become eternal flowing sources of fresh water, feeding the great Tigris and Euphrates rivers with a gentle and nurturing suspension. Her last dying breath was permanently harnessed to become those atmospheric winds that endlessly circle the now carefully contained upper atmospheres of our globe, allowing a beautifully structured reality to finally bloom from its chaotic past. Towering mountains of jagged stone were shaped directly from her broken bones to anchor those shifting green valleys. While our early terrestrial plains took solid shape, a separate trial was preparing to unfold high above. Quingu was quickly brought to the grand luminous assembly hall to stand before the new divine council, bound tightly in heavy copper chains. This disgraced general faced an absolute uncompromising judgment from his radiant captors. It is here that our story takes on a new, profound twist, once which would usher the first breath of mortal life upon those sandy shores. It didn't take the gods long to discover that it was he who had been the primary spark which ignited Tiamat's rage. He was formally indicted for manipulating the primordial goddess into waging her catastrophic war against their peaceful celestial order. Those supreme creators of our universe delivered a swift celestial justice without any lingering hesitation. Just like the 7 demons before him, his arrogant prince of deep water was violently executed. His ancient veins spilled his dark, vital essence upon the bright, polished floors of that heavenly sanctuary. Those deep crimson pools contained the most raw essence of his being. It was a potent magic that carried a volatile spark of pure, unrestricted wilderness. Yet this fallen commander would not simply fade into an endless expanse of forgotten history. Enki stared thoughtfully into those dark pools. He recognized a profound opportunity resting quietly within the spilled blood of this titan, and possessed an esoteric capability to repurpose such untamed energy for a much higher cause. In this particular version of the law, the EGG did not rebel, but the high gods knew that this working classes of deities were already growing exhausted from their menial labor, and having been elevated to their new positions of ultimate power over the cosmos, they would need a new labor force to allow them to focus on preserving harmony and directing the now uncontested development of the earth. Sweeping agricultural canals demanded endless hours of back-breaking toil to keep sweet water flowing freely. Those younger EGG gods complained bitterly about their unending tasks of shaping soft river mud into towering temple platforms. A completely new species of mortal caretakers was desperately needed to relieve those immortal beings of their endless fatigue. They required a dedicated workforce, once which was capable of understanding the complex cosmic instructions from the distant starry vault. Enki planned to mix this rebellious titan blood with soft-yielding clay from his lower marshes in the southern seas. This potent mixture would provide the perfect vessel to harbor an incredible spark of divine intelligence. He would soon forge the very first human beings to act as obedient servants for a sprawling earthly garden. Their entire existence would be defined by their service to those exact same gods who had overthrown their own ancestors. It is a profoundly philosophical origin, one which forever links mankind to a dark and long since forgotten era of primordial titans, suggesting that, still to this day, we may carry the restless essence of that slain god within our very own pulsing veins. Perhaps we will never know for sure, but it is a concept which still echoes down throughout every age yet to come. Because, strangely, this ancient rebellious spark perfectly mirrors the inherent and extremely unpredictable friction that seems embedded so deeply within every mortal spirit. Those dark, winding rivers of our ancestral past will forever pulse with a quiet resonance of primeval defiance, but it would be balanced by this ultimate act of biological engineering that would officially close this dark chapter, to usher in a tranquil new epoch. That sweeping era slowly settled into an unbroken rhythm of absolute tranquility. Vast open skies returned beautifully to a state of perfect, unshakable equilibrium. A pristine celestial canopy blankets our resting earth to offer the eternal promise of security. The early caretakers of those fertile river valleys trusted entirely in this magnificent framework of antiquity. Their bodies rested securely upon massive foundations of protection formed directly from the slumbering primordial gods that remained quietly below, to keep our terrestrial plains safely insulated from the shifting winds just beyond the furthest parameters of our world. We breathe those exact same atmospheric currents that were tamed by the gods so long ago. Every gentle exhalation harmonizes flawlessly with the slow turning of distant planetary spheres. The magnificent driving force of creation continues to hum with a steady flow of reassuring resonance. Primeval deities rest comfortably in a permanent state of undisturbed slumber, just like the enormous roots of support belonging to the great tree of life. These forgotten titans effortlessly hold up the full weight of the earth. Their quiet submission ensures that its fragile surface remains perfectly at peace. Sprawling gardens of agriculture can bloom freely without anything to hold it back. This beautiful cosmic balance is found in the beating hearts of every living creature to walk about our lands, and the ancient essence of vitality woven into the first mortal beings now rests completely at harmony within our own hearts. That primeval spark finds intrinsic serenity inside our very souls, while our conscious minds drift along starlit folds of space, searching its mysterious depths for the lingering remnants of our hidden past. We are all a part of this grand journey through time and space, our quiet heartbeats pulsing in perfect time with the steady, gentle twinkling of distant planets. Wandering thoughts dissolve seamlessly into the cooling night air. A deeply restorative trance washes over the first generation of mortal beings, sleeping inside woven huts of reeds. Our entire physical realm surrenders willingly to the comforting embrace of midnight. High above those dreaming terrestrial plains sits a radiant assembly of watchful guardians, where the protective Anunnaki deities recline comfortably within their shimmering celestial shrines. A gentle silver light casts a pale glow of protection across quiet valleys of winding rivers. They keep a constant vigil over our beautiful earthly garden far below. Their benevolent oversight guarantees that a perfectly balanced system will never falter. Sweet currents of the Euphrates River flow smoothly under this flawless order. Luminous constellations trace predictable pathways to map the eternal canopy. Every twinkling sphere serves as a silent guardian for the resting population. A profound sensation of warmth radiates downward to soothe tired muscles, as heavy shadows stretched lazily across the silent delta, we feel the physical boundaries of that ancient metropolis slowly melting away. Towering walls of mud brick dissolve gently into a soundless ether, where we surrender completely to an overwhelming harmony of turning heavens. Day fades beautifully into night, reflecting the dark depths of the vast cosmic ocean. Smooth currents of deep time carry our floating spirits far beyond familiar landscapes. We drift peacefully into a comforting embrace of celestial seas twinkling overhead. A mesmerizing lullaby echoes softly from those distant planetary spheres, wrapping us in an unshakable blanket of pure starlight. This quiet universe breathes in perfect synchronization with our own. Gentle breezes carry a sweet scent of blooming date palms through empty city squares. This fragrant perfume mingles flawlessly with a rich aroma of damp river silt and creates an intoxicating atmosphere that lulls every living creature into a deeply restorative trance. Smooth stone pathways release their stored warmth from a long day of bright sunshine, perfectly blending into the cool descending chill of twilight. Listen closely to the softly lapping tides of gentle waters against muddy banks. It provides a steady example of predictable motion that mirrors the slow rotation of our galaxy. Ancient waterways whisper soothing assurances, settling into an enduring state of peace. Let your awareness sink even deeper into this welcoming expanse of infinite space. Every single molecule of your being aligns beautifully with the soothing hum of antiquity. A gentle cosmic wind cradles you safely within its flawless operations through time. Everything is held securely within a compassionate architecture designed long ago. Golden dawns will inevitably rise, exactly as intended by the very gods who first brought forth light to our primeval world. Marduk stands triumphant, the tablet of destinies and laws of the holy May reclaimed, and the chaotic tides of Tiamat have been tamed. As you drift gently into the world of dreams, take in the broad scope of the world around you. According to the ancient scribes, the mountains you see are her bones, the rivers that nourish the soil are her tears. The very air you breathe is the tamed breath of the gods. The very same atmosphere which sent refreshing gusts of wind to fill the lungs of ancient architects thousands of years ago. The constellations that guided the first scribes are the same lights, watching over you tonight. There is a profound sense of security in this continuity, the knowledge that you are resting upon a foundation that has held firm since the first dawn. The great deep is once again silent, the rivers flow with a predictable rhythm, and the universe has returned to a state of balance. And perhaps we all sleep under the watch of the same guardians who first brought light to the world. You are part of this enduring cycle, safe within the architecture of time, wrapped in the warm embrace of knowledge that has crossed thousands of years to reach us. As the echoes of these ancient civilizations fade, let the sheer scale of time become a heavy, warm blanket around you. The world is settled. The stars are all in their place, just as they have been for countless ages. You are drifting into the same deep, rhythmic peace that has lent its rejuvenating balance to every generation that has come before. You may rest now, as we always have under those stars, safe in the silence of the ages.